Famous singer and Beach Boy Mike Love says, "The history of mankind is the history of war." And it makes sense to incline towards his outlook on us as a species. Humans have been waging war forever. From the way we behave, experts have to conclude that conflict and competition is in our DNA. While certain blocks of history stand out as periods of intense competition for military and technological supremacy, it isn't wrong to consider all civilization a stretched-out arms race. The earliest humans waged war over resources like hunting, fishing, and foraging grounds. They devised the use of long pieces of wood as tools, but also as weapons. The Stone Age followed about 3 million years ago, and there were deadlier weapons than ever before. Archaeological evidence in the form of stone spearheads showed deadly enmity between the people of East and West Africa and Central Asia. The Bronze Age and the Iron Age would see bloody conflict amidst storms of chariots, shields, spears, bows, and arrows as empires around the Mediterranean clashed. Clans and tribes in Western Europe and the British Isles also developed warrior cultures that would last many centuries even after being baptized into Christianity. The point is, our ancestors were in a constant grapple for resources and power, and sometimes in competition to earn divine favor by waging holy war against pagans. The most important answers to this question are the most immediate victims of war: the young and the old, the meek and the mighty, who have their lives snatched away in feuds they often have little to do with as individuals. But history, cold and heartless as it usually is, takes little notice of the billions of innocent lives extinguished in the onslaught. Historians' lenses are more concerned with transfers of wealth and treasure, expanding and shrinking borders, shifting alliances, and who had the best and worst tactics in the field. But war affects individuals and societies far away from the epicenter. Humans, in a mixture of learning their lessons and profiting from the carnage, take steps to be better prepared for the next conflict or prevent it altogether. An example of this are the Peloponnesian Wars. After fighting each other all around the peninsula, the battered and beaten Greek city-states were easy pickings for Alexander the Great to build his home base second to Macedonia. Young Alexander would diplomatically align the exhausted Greeks and lead them to create his vast empire, forever changing the social, economic, and military landscape of civilizations stretching from the Nile to the Indus. Imagine the countless lives shaped, in extrapolation, by the way Alexander and his generals chose to rule over conquered peoples. Periods of relative peace have come and gone. From 1815 to 1914, the Pax Britannica was probably the farthest the world has gotten from warfare in recent history. In reality, periods of world peace have only been achieved by glossing over regions of conflict, oppression, occupation, genocide, and violence with semantics and technicalities. The invention of the nuclear bomb, which itself was the result of an intense arms race, has changed the world yet again. As many expected, outright invasions and declarations of war are not as common, since almost every nation in the world aligns itself with one bloc or the other, each side having its teeth constantly bared in the form of nuclear arsenals and covert threats to the enemy. Total war and military culture in the form that has been glorified historically is hard to come by in the modern world. Instead, powerful parties resort to protocols such as covert operations and mutual assured destruction to keep war at bay. Like much of modern human life, war and peace are decided by incentives. Incentives that, most of the time, take political or economic forms. It's hard not to sound very cynical about this, but war and peace today, and possibly since forever, are thrust onto the masses whenever the powerful have something to gain from either. At its core, war is primal and evolutionary. Our ancestors didn't just fight the elements for their own survival, they had to compete with fellow humans for resources as well. When hierarchical societies developed, rulers had much to gain from waging war. Flowing coffers, ownership of huge tracts of land, mighty warriors' obedience, and lives full of comfort, pleasure, and godlike power all encourage kings and rulers to become warlords. The biblical warrior Joshua, who besieged Jericho in modern-day Palestine and won the land of Canaan for his people. Hannibal, whose elephant armies trampled Scipio's legions again and again. Richard the Lionheart and Reynald of Chatillon, whose sanctified crusaders waged holy war against the ever-gracious and ingenious Saladin in the Levant. Timur the Lame, whose hordes of mounted archers terrified the Ottomans under Sultan Bayezid. Hernan Cortés, whose brutal campaign deep into Aztec territory would cruelly snatch Montezuma's empire in the name of the Church and change the world forever. There can be no debate that some of the most idolized names to ever exist have been warriors of great ambition and guile. Of course, this reflects our human leanings into respect for might and for tactical supremacy. When the people are told their way of life, their survival, and their very bloodlines are at risk, they go great lengths to survive. While the armies clash with armies, the populace can't help but feel obliged to play a role. Healers and doctors improve their remedies to help the wounded. Craftsmen find new, better ways to manipulate matter and produce superior weapons. Society becomes fitter in an effort to survive. Reflects the biological notions of evolution pretty well, doesn't it? But you may be surprised to know these were only the most superficial effects wars have had on us. The social role of women has been revised in much of the developed world. And the Second World War was a major driving force behind this change. Massive drafting and conscription of men from around the world was seen, and women were encouraged to replace males in factories as a consequence. Soon enough, women's rights movements were sparked all around the world, whose benefits to women's well-being are undeniable. In chemistry, a catalyst is a chemical substance that accelerates processes around it, but is able to stay unchanged in its own right. This video could have started off by calling war the ultimate catalyst in human civilization, but it would hardly be true. War has been changing forever. There exists a cyclical relationship. War changes us, and we change war. And from the jet engine to penicillin to the internet, civil society has developed the inventions manifold and lent them back to the fighting man, urging him to destroy, injure, and kill more efficiently than ever before. The line differentiating the evolution of war and the evolution of man is inherently blurred. In other words, a paradox exists that says war has changed entirely, but at the same time hasn't changed one bit. Hordes of youths still lead each other to kill other youths, driven by delusions of loyalty, ambition, and obligation. Old, bitter, and petty people still pull strings from safe havens, sacrificing millions of young and old lives for gain that is ultimately personal. However much war has changed, it is man who has changed it. And for many of the ways in which man has changed, war is what has changed him.